Okay, so we've got everything pretty much ready now. Let's take a look at what we've done. So over here, you can see we've got some nice shiny joints there. We poked the holes through. I reinforced with a little bit more solder on the top of those joints there for the receiver. Then we've got the camera coming from there to here, and the VTX going from there over to this side over here. Over here we had the 9 volts rather, then the ground, then I think it was the video, and then the RX telemetry port. So we've got everything nice and neatly wound up to shield it. Everything's out of the way of everything. We've got the ESC plugged in. What I've done here is I've wired the receiver antennas through here, put some zip ties, put one zip tie there, one zip tie there. Antenna goes through here, put some heat shrink on and just heat that up. So that's nice and secure on there. I've also zip tied the XT60 over here onto the bottom. Just need to make sure that it's out of the way of propellers. So when you put your top on, we put our top on, okay, and we're going to power it up. So that's going to be well out of the way of any propellers, okay. Just bear that in mind. Right, that's should be all right. We may need to put that another way, but that's going to be nicely secured onto there. So just making sure that everything is out of the way of the propellers. We've zip tied the capacitor, which we made up. So positive to over here, negative to little pad over on this side. And I've just put that through over to here. Some people put it here. It doesn't really matter where you put it. I usually try and make some nice long wires for that to go on to give it some extra strength. Some people literally just wire straight from the capacitor, the 2 leads that come off the capacitor onto the battery leads. But again, you'll see on rotor builds later, which I'll introduce you to. But there are very many different ways to do all of this. I've put some electrical tape, some more electrical tape around to protect the motor wires here. So I just had the top bit on before, whereas I put this bit on. Some people use this braided stuff here, which you can use. You'd have to cut it off with a hot knife. This stuff, if you try and cut it with scissors, it'll just fray like hell. So cut it off with a hot knife. You'd put some heat shrink over here onto. Obviously, this is all before you wire up your motors if you wanted to do this, obviously. So some heat shrink on here. Some people put some heat shrink on here. I'll show you an example later. And that's another way to do it and make it look really nice. I put some gummies on the bottom here to seat the flight controller on. These purple ones there. I put some just screws to tighten down the flight controller. You'll get all of that in your kit with the flight control, the flight stack. We're going to just zip tie our antenna to the back here, so we can pop that under there and just put some zip ties through these 2 holes here. And again, people use TPU mounts. I'll show you an example of that on rotor builds. Again, there are many different ways to do this, but I'm just gonna zip tie that onto there. Don't forget, always when we power up, always have your antenna on. Never power up a VTX without an antenna on, because it'll fry it most likely. I've decided we'll do the GPS a bit later on. Let's get everything working here, and yeah, so I guess what we can do now is power them up and see if we get some smoke. Here, do yourself a favor, get one of these smoke stoppers. Okay, I'll have a link in the shopping list. Absolute must-have thing to have, because the first time you power up, if you've got any solder joints overlapping, anything going wrong, you know, and you power up straight from the battery, it's just going to end up in smoke and a bust, whatever. So yeah, we will plug this into our smoke stopper that way. Okay, I'm using a 6S battery. We'll talk a little bit more about the motors in a bit. We're using 2207 stator and 1700 kV motors. So generally we're going to use these with 6S. As I say, we can throttle down, we can limit the throttle on that, so you know you're not getting the full power of 6S as a beginner, so that's good. But these motors are designed for 6S really, as we will see later on. So let's have a look and let's just see if this powers up nicely. And it's looking really nice. So we can see that the receiver is beeping green in there. That means it's ready to bind. Everything's lit up here. The VTX has got a light on it. So it looks like we're good to go. So now we're looking at the fully built quad with the top plate on. Don't forget your battery strap here. You've got your antenna on the back here. As I said, we've just zip tied the antenna to the top plate here. You can use either a stubby antenna or a longer antenna if you wish. Stubby antenna for a lower profile. Just make sure that you've got your camera mounted correctly with the carbon, with this part facing at the front, and of course you can angle your camera using these screws over here. So we've got our camera angled at a nice, fairly low profile angle there. And our next step is to go ahead and bind this receiver to our radio, and then we can start configuring things in Betaflight.